Well, I could have done with longer applause for that, but here I am instead. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit or drilling down into some of the detail that Ashu mentioned in our earlier presentations, that joining some of the dots. So, I mean, when you look at businesses out there, and I'm going to start with analytics and transformation here, some businesses seem absolutely perfect for analytics. If you think maybe about a supermarket, they've got fantastic data. If they sell one product a bit quickly, they need to buy more. If it's not selling well, they need to, either adjust the price or reduce the order. So their starting point is the transaction are fairly simple. You swipe it across the till and put it in the basket. And the barcode scan gives you fantastic data. So you've got a brilliant taste to start from. But as we've been talking about today, talking about the customer service in the contact center, is not quite the same picture. For one thing, the transactions aren't quite so simple. It's often a multi-step, multi-stage process that you have to take the customer through. And then, as Chris alluded to, if you're not careful, the data quality is not the same. It's as if the shop assistant had to serve you and then try and remember everything you'd bought and write it down on a scratch pad. So that's what some of the customers are facing. They haven't got great data quality. And even if they did have, it's a complex process to solve. So looking down at that process itself, this is a diagram we use when we're working with clients to try and explore what's going on in the service interaction. So what happens is we start with what the customer thinks, and then we need to work down through a layer of question and answer till we get to what the actual question is, what the actual issue is. Now that top one, which we call the navigation layer, the challenges there is often a bit emotional. It's the customer's already a bit upset, as Brian was this morning with his lack of a suitcase. There's some emotion, there's some language. But anyway, that's the first challenge for an organization, an agent, to what's the root cause? Why are you really calling? But then there's a second phase from going what the issue is to work out what needs doing. So again, they may rely on experience, they may follow a process, there may be some elements of best practice they're supposed to challenge, and at the end they work out what needs doing. And then the final stage of the service interaction is getting it done and documented, doing the wrap-up phase. And there, often the challenge is the next call is coming in, or what was it we talked about? So there are issues there of challenges of consistency. So that's kind of the general model of a service interaction. But it's not the same for all businesses and all interactions. So one of the companies I had the pleasure of working with a couple of years ago was Lego. So I'm using them as this example. So Lego have several different types of interaction, but two of their major core drivers. The first one is often a grandparent or somebody ringing up saying, I want to buy a Lego set, what do you recommend? So that's the left-hand side one. It's a fairly vague starting point. And we need to work down that. So it's a question of asking how much do you want to spend? How old's the child? What have they got already? So the difficulty is in the navigation phase. What am I going to sell you? After that, it's all relatively simple. We pick a set and we move forward. Their other call type, one of the other major call drivers is there is a part missing from a set. So that's pretty clear what's in it, right? So Lego are very good. They will, wherever possible, send you a replacement part. They might do a bit of checking to see if you're repeatedly asking for replacement parts, as there are a minority that do. But then the little bit of the complexity is that some parts are copyright, so there's intellectual property, so they can't just give them away. Like, for example, the Star Wars figures. They can't just give those away. They need to make a payment to the organization. And it's a bit more complicated than that. I think the legs of a Stormtrooper, they're okay because they're standard Lego legs, whereas the top half you have to pay an amount for. So they need to work that out. So as I'm saying, sometimes navigation is the issue in the service interaction. Sometimes it's the resolution layer. But in pretty much all cases, the after-call wrap is the weakest part. That's the one where you are struggling to get the best quality information. So traditionally, customers of ours, such as 20 years ago with Orange, would start by using our guidance and our analytics to support those customer interactions. So the guidance is, as Chris has ably pointed out, it's not a script. We're trying to make sure people can sound authentic and unscripted, whilst at the same time having clear guidance about where they go. The navigation can help both at the guidance can help at all three stages of the interaction, the navigation, the resolution, the wrap. And the analytics is measuring and managing what your calls are about, how long the calls are, who are your best agents, and so on. Now, the current version of the product that's just come out now takes that a bit further, because in the current version of the product, eGain Solve, we get, as well as being a multi-channel platform, we have the Solve button. And when as an agent, you click the Solve button, that takes all, we pre-populate the search with everything we know about, everything that's relevant to the customer interaction. We can also use external data to auto-answer questions about things we know so we don't have to ask the question again. And then on the wrap-up stage, we can take the full audit history, all the articles viewed, how the thing was classified, and write it back into the customer context. So Solve Rate takes this quite a bit further. Now, our current analytics tools do as you'd expect. They help us to do all the dashboards you'd want for all the different channels. We can look at the contact type. We can look at the cost of care. We can look at who are the best and the best performing agents and so on. But one of the things we're doing currently with some of our customers, we're exploring a little bit more with analytics to see if we can identify where are the customer service hotspots. And the thing we're using at the moment is in the idea of volatility. How much does something vary? So on the left-hand side, you'll see the demand volatility, how much the demand for call type varies. And on the right-hand side, we'll talk about the performance. And I'll just talk of those in detail. So with the analytics tool, we can unpick the overall volume of calls and look at which ones are varying most. So you can see there, if you can see the different colors, there's an orange line there that's pretty steady, a greenish line that's steady, and the blue line is all over the place. So that means the demand for those call types is highly variable, a lot of volatility. Now, you could attempt to solve that at self-service or deflecting through the IVR, but the challenge in the contact center is when you've got spikes of a particular call type, you're often going to push those calls to somebody who often doesn't get them, in order to keep the flow moving. So you're ending up overflowing into other call queues with agents who don't know so much. So what we're doing, using this to identify with Solve, that if we've got a situation where we're pushing call types into different people, then we can make sure we can tailor the guidance to the level of experience of the agent who's getting them. So if it's what you do every day, you'll get the normal guidance. If you've never taken a call like this before, we'll give you the detailed step-by-step, because within the analytics, we know all the calls you've had, we know what you normally do. So that's what we do if there's a high demand volatility. When we're talking about performance volatility, we've used a chart like this one. And on the chart there, you'll see that on the left-hand side, we're looking at a particular KPI. In this case, it's repeat calls, and that goes from 0 up to 40%. And across the bottom, we're breaking that out, but for the different call types we're interested in. So the way the graphic works there is the black and white lines here. These indicate the lowest value. The top one indicates the highest value. The bit in red is the 50%, the bulk of the calls, and that line in the middle is the kind of mean value. So the idea of this kind of chart is it's to help us work out where we need to focus. So you look at the left-hand side one, which is labeled lost and stolen, we're seeing that there's quite a low repeat rate. There's quite a low variation of that repeat rate. So that's probably not a high priority for us at the moment. If you look at the right-hand side, there's a much higher repeat rate, but there's also very little volatility. So that probably indicates that that particular process has a systemic issue. You have to call back multiple times because of something in the process. So perhaps the one we need to look at is the one in the middle, which is transaction refuse. And that's interesting because some agents are doing reliably 10% repeat rate, whereas others are going up to 30% repeat rate. So the point about looking at this is, with analytics, you know who your best agents are. So you're going to look and say, let's see what those best agents are doing, and let's see if we can't put that into the guidance and make sure all the agents follow that same process. So in other words, this is the call type we would start on to use guided help, the AI tool, to move you forward. Now, going forward, as Ashu announced earlier on, we're introducing a machine learning service. So, as I think we've touched on here, machine learning is very exciting, but to get the value out of it, you need training data. You need a training set where you have the inputs and you know the right answers. And with that, you can really start to train an algorithm. So in this case, we've got all the history in our own customer interactions. So we have in our system great sources of training data. We can use the chat transcripts. We can take the first couple of lines of the chat and how the agent categorized it, and that's the starting point of a great training set. We could also look at web traffic using our Journey Analytics tool, or we could look at the customer history, when they called, when they chatted, when they phoned, and see if we can use that to predict the next outcome. The point is that you need good training data. The algorithm on their own is great, but without training data, you're not getting any value. So in this case, we can take our own data and move forward. So interestingly enough, the learning system helps to provide the guidance, because as in the case of chat, we can cut through that kind of navigation layer. The machine learning can tell us when they say this, it's about a product inquiry. When they say this, it's probably about an order inquiry. But on its own, that's a little bit risky. So we tend to use the guidance the learning to help the guidance, so that we can say, right, I know what that's about. It's about a product inquiry. Go to the guided help that tells me how to deal with a product inquiry. So I can either I can cut the time, I can maybe automate it by going straight to the answer, or put them straight into the right guided flow. But the other thing that's interesting is the guidance can really help the learning, because the machine learning is just an algorithm. If it thinks I've got a question with my order, well, it's probably wise to check. So the way we use our guidance there is to say, right, the prediction says you've got an order problem. Let's see if you've actually got an order. If you've no outstanding orders, then it's probably the wrong prediction. If you've 2 outstanding orders, I need to start by asking which one you're talking about. So as you'll see on the demonstration booth, we'll use the prediction that comes from machine learning, and then we'll use it with the AI reasoning tool using embedded customer data to actually go and see, right, how should I take that forward? Okay, and we can also use that to identify, if we don't recognize the solution at all, we can capture new information. So analytics can really help on the learning side. So as I mentioned, a starting point for a lot of organizations is, here are all the chat transcripts, let's say, let's put them into an algorithm, let's churn it through and see what we can learn. But with the platform, when you've got analytics, you already know who your best agents are. So you don't have to start with all the agents. You can just filter out who are my top performing agents and build a training data set just from those guys. That way you'll get much quicker and higher quality information. So we can refine the training by what we know about operational performance. The other thing we can do is that we can use learning to refine the analytics piece. So in other words, we can see how our best performers classify a call, and we can make sure that every other person classifies it the same way by prompting them with the machine learning algorithms. So we can use the training data again to help with that difficult classification piece. And we can also deal with it, possibly to look at sentiment. Now, I've seen a number of situations when I've been in a call center. On one occasion, I did see there was a smiley face with a slider underneath it, and the agent could decide whether it's happy or unhappy, as they were taking the call. But as I watched, as soon as the call came in, they just moved it over to a big smile, and then asked the customer what they could do. The reason being that they didn't see any point mentioning that the customer wasn't more than happy. So they didn't quite get that one. But in this case, things like machine learning are pretty good at identifying sentiment, maybe more so than humans. And so that's another good way where we can have the learning to adopt to the analysis. So, final slide. Just nod to James to get ready. Essentially, the idea is that looking at these specific dots, to get to a good solution for your customer conversations. You obviously need analytics to know what's going on. You need guidance so that people can be authentic and appear unscripted. And you need and now we're introducing learning so that we can reduce the effort. So you can have great customer service without any of those. But if you've no analytics, you're pretty much in the dark about what's going on and what the trends are. If you've no guidance, then it's all about making sure you've trained every agent to deal with every single call. And if you know machine learning, then you've got a heavy manual effort to do to get it straight. All right. Thank you for your time, and I'll step aside. Okay.